What's up, guys? This is Jimmy Rex, and this is a special episode of the Jimmy Rex Show. This is an episode I wasn't planning on doing. It's Friday afternoon. I'm sitting here, and I've turned down multiple requests this week, several requests for some pretty big podcasts to talk about everything going on with OUR and Tim Ballard and Vice and Sean Reyes and all the other hot topics here in Utah. And the only reason I've decided to make this podcast is because there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of things being said. And ultimately, the reason why I decided to do this is because I saw an interview yesterday a post that Tim put out, and his level of denial and narcissism around this whole thing is kind of annoying. And so I thought it's time that I actually talk a little bit more about what's going on. First off, give a little bit of background. In 2015, or 16, whatever it was, I started working with Operation Underground Railroad. I was introduced to Paul Hutchinson, met him at an event he was speaking at about an op that they had done, the one in Columbia, and went to a fundraiser thrown at Scott Keller's house. Went with a couple of friends of mine, Sean Whalen, Travis Prince, and we fell in love with the cause, fell in love with what was going on, and decided that we wanted to do something about it. And so I started building a relationship with Paul, started going and doing some undercover fighting type training, Krav Maga training with Joe Gleed, who was training all the OUR operatives at that time. And about 6 months later, I had a chance to go on my first op. The first time I went with the group was to Haiti. The op had been compromised, or for whatever reason wasn't happening. So they went to the charity where guests know ran that charity, the orphanage, and that was where Gardy had been kidnapped from. And long story short, I was there when one of the men, I can't remember which one, he found out he was supposed to be adopting these two kids that were siblings, and found out there was more siblings and ended up adopting. It was actually a really beautiful moment. And Tim was hugging his soon-to-be kids that he was adopting. It was just a really beautiful moment. Fell in love with everything that was going on. My next time I had an opportunity to work with them was in Cancun. And we did a sting down there. Paul and I believe it was Tim were running front. They had a couple ex-FBI guys, former cop guys as well. I was kind of just one of the guys in the background. I speak Spanish, went on a Mormon mission to Monterrey, Mexico. So it became a pretty good asset to help the group. And we did that one. From there, Paul invited me to go be part of the team that would go in and find the traffickers on a couple of other ops, one of which was the Cabo San Lucas op. We'll get back to that. That was in the Vice article. I was on that op and had the chance to see firsthand kind of how everything worked. I went to the Dominican Republic. I had a chance to do an op in Ecuador. In all, I think, of Mexico City. In all, I think I went 12 different times undercover, one time or another, for a trip. I've done the math. I think there was over 30 traffickers, quote unquote, that I was part of a sting that they got arrested, and over 100 kids that were rescued. That being said, there's a lot of things that have always kind of haunted me about all of this, and I feel like now would be a good time to talk about it. First off, with what's going on with OUR. Well, so many details here. I don't even know where to start. With what's been happening right now, first off, one of the things I loved about Tim is how much passion he had. From day one, I saw that passion. Tim gave me a lot of opportunities and changed my life forever. So I've always been very grateful for Tim. I got the chance to go to ClickFunnels when they showed Operation Toussaint for the first time with the director of the movie and Russell Brunson. I got to go on the stage. It was a dream come true for me to be a part of that. I got to go meet Tony Robbins probably half a dozen times, got to sit VIP. Tony himself walked us across the hot coals at his UPW event in Los Angeles because we were part of the group working directly with Tony. I was there with Paul and a couple of the other operators. I also had the chance to go work with the Pittsburgh Steelers with Sean Reyes, Tim Ballard, Tim's son, and Paul. We went out there, spent, I think it was a day or maybe 2 days with their coach, Mike Tomlin, and got this opportunity of a lifetime to be there. And just had a really beautiful experience with OUR. The ops themselves, there's a lot to go into there. But as far as my experience with OUR, it was beautiful. I threw a couple events for them. I threw a couple black tie galas, one of which I'm going to talk about coming up here in a little bit. We partnered with Rudy Gobert from the Jazz. I think 3 years in a row, raised over $150,000. Sean was our auctioneer, Reyes. Tim and his wife came to those. Paul, filled it up with a lot of his wealthy friends. I met a lot of wealthy men. That's where I met Dave Bateman for the first time. Came to that event, who ended up forming and trotted over $1 billion company, and just had the opportunity to meet a lot of cool people. I was meeting a lot of incredible individuals through the network of OUR and through the network of Paul. And so I've forever been grateful for that opportunity. I know it was called of God. I know it was part of my path to do that. And I want to kind of talk about some of the things that are happening today, but also kind of why I have this insider information. I just know all the characters in the story, and I've talked to them personally since all this has been going down. And the thing that made me mad about Tim recently, is I feel like I'm kind of duped. I feel like I got duped. I feel like I never thought Tim would do the things that have come out and the things that haven't come out yet that are going to come out. I'll just cut through the suspense for you. It's a lot worse than the article said. Tim wasn't just sleeping in the same bed and showering with these women. He was full on having affairs. I know the names of multiple people that he had the affairs with, broke up families, and that's going to come out. And the thing that I can't figure out is he knows this is going to come out. Like, he knows these stories are going to break. He knows that he's dead in the water. The church does not throw people under the bus, by the way. The church is smart. If you think of the church as like an organization with self-preservation, it's a lot easier to understand a lot of the things that they do. Tim did have a very close relationship with M. Russell Ballard, very obvious. They have pictures of them traveling and doing other things. He also was a silent partner, according to Tim, in this whole thing that he was trying to do, the whiteboard video and all that stuff. Everybody's seen that. There's a silent partner was one of these, and Paul should probably just come out and talk about this stuff, but he's talked about it on the record before. And long story short, at that meeting, Tim had mentioned that his silent partner was M. Russell Ballard. The church is smart enough to know this. They don't want, once they found out that Tim was having affairs and he was using M. Russell Ballard's name, saying that he basically okayed it to fool these women that were volunteering for OUR. And that's why he was essentially betrayed so badly. That's why the church publicly made sure that everybody knew that the church didn't endorse Tim or OUR, because it's that bad. The church never does that. They've never done that for somebody that was an active member, unless they needed to get ahead of the story. And so when you think about that way, it's not the church's fault. I was duped by Tim too. We wanted to rescue children. That's what the mission was. That's what everything was supposed to be about. Yet over and over, I saw firsthand Tim's ego and Paul's ego, if I'm being honest. And he's one of my close friends. And so, I'm going to be honest here about a couple things though, but him and Tim, their egos absolutely destroyed at that time what was going on with OUR. And I'll explain. So long story short, you saw the Vice article this week about the psychic. You saw the Vice article about when Paul touched the breast of an underage girl, which, by the way, she's not underage. She was proven to be over 18. That part of the story didn't come out till later for whatever reason, so that they could add on to the article instead of saying it up front, because I think it does matter a lot. I was there. I was 10 feet away when it happened. And I'll say this. I'm not going to say too much about that because that's Paul's story to tell. But at the end of the day, 3 things crossed my mind when that happened. And by the way, you have to understand that there was bad guys undercover and there was evil dudes. These were the most evil dudes we'd ever arrested, we'd ever worked with, we'd ever met. That particular op, we were dealing with 3 different groups of traffickers. It was in Cabo and it was right downtown. If you've ever been to Cabo, it's not that big of a downtown. And 2 of the traffickers, when they heard we were dealing with this other trafficker, by the way, I hate that the story publicly says where we were. That puts our lives, I feel like, a little bit in danger, because I don't know. We got people arrested, traffickers, really bad people. And so I'm not sure why that part of the story gets told publicly, but it's out there. So whatever. But when the trafficker that we ended up working with found out, when the other 2 traffickers found out we were working with them, they said, we can't work with you then because that guy runs the town. And so we knew we were working with some really bad dudes. So you got to understand that, in that moment, we were like, oh shit, that was the most serious this had ever gotten. And they basically, the way it would work is we had an undercover camera with us. We had to prove that they had these underage girls, or else we couldn't get an op set up. And so we had already talked to these guys, and they said they had 25 girls that were underage. And essentially we said, we have to get video footage or else we can't do the op. And so we told these guys, we'll pay you to show us the girls that you're trafficking. That was the way that essentially it worked, just so we had proof that it was happening. Like, there was already plenty of proof that they did have people they were trafficking. But what people don't understand is when you go undercover, you never see the girls. Like, you only meet them briefly, like in a parking lot or a Walmart or something, or at a restaurant, so that you can tell that they have them. We get a video of it, and then the police will set up the sting. And so we were trying to get proof that they had it. So just meet them. And they say, yeah, come with us. They took us to this strip club that was on the main drag of Cabo, right downtown. And we didn't even go in. We were downstairs in the lobby, and they brought these girls down the stairs that were working at the strip club. And we were kind of already like, oh shit, like they're probably not underage then, because they're working publicly in the strip club. And long story short, the guy was like, see, look, this is one of them. He told her to lift up her shirt, or he lifted up her shirt or whatever. And then he like motioned to Paul, like, to touch them. Paul did. And I remember thinking at the time, number one, I was like, we were dealing with, again, these were some evil freaking dudes. So number one, I remember thinking, gosh, I'm glad that wasn't me that he pointed out. Number two, I remember thinking, I'm glad Paul didn't hesitate. And number three, I remember thinking, I probably wouldn't, I wish that didn't happen. That probably wasn't a good idea that he did that. I think I even mentioned that to Paul later. That being said, it was tricky. Things aren't black and white. Multiple things can be true. And now I'm going to speak to a bigger issue that, like, a lot of people have talked about, whether or not we were causing trafficking to happen or not, or soliciting for trafficking. Because it looks like, based on that article that we were trying to find, because he says Mas Fresca, the whole reason for that is, like, we already knew we were dealing with the traffickers in Cabo. This had been verified from 2 other groups of traffickers. And so we were trying to just get video footage. And so the whole conversation was around, like, were those girls 16? Were they not? And we were kind of hoping so, because that meant we could do an op and rescue whoever came. Now, also on these ops, when the women would get rescued, when the girls would get rescued, typically about a third of them to half of them would actually be underage. The rest would not. And so it wasn't unusual it's like, okay, well, even if, they're not all underage, like, it's still helping them out or whatever. And there was some of the ops, I will say, to that point, about 3 years ago, I told the girl I was dating at the time that I was done doing undercover ops. And the reason I told her this, and this is the only time I ever shared that until right now, is I said, it doesn't sit right with me completely the way they're doing it. I said 2 things are true here. Number one is we have absolutely rescued some girls that were being trafficked. We found them. We had recorded conversation from the Mexican federales. This was the only proof I've ever had that these girls were being trafficked. They were begging the guys not to traffic them anymore. But it wasn't like they don't hold them behind cages and things like that. Like, they lived at home, but they would basically call them and say, you're doing this. One of the arrests we did, it was a 8th grade school teacher, and she would use her position to get these girls. She'd just tell them they were coming to a party. They'd go to the party, and next thing they knew, they were being, raped, drugged, told that if they told anybody, they would, kill them, or they'd tell their parents what they did. And so that's how trafficking usually works. It wasn't like these girls were being held against their will 24/7. And so a lot of times when people think of trafficking, it's just not how it's portrayed, even in The Sound of Freedom. I didn't love parts of that movie because I had to tell a bunch of people that asked me about it. I'm like, no, that's not really how it works. It does work that way sometimes, but it's very rare. By the way, these stats, and I'm all over the place. I'm not using notes. I'm just trying to speak from my heart here. I just feel like I should share the information that I have. A lot of the stats that come out about how many kids are being trafficked around the world, they say like 2 million. Then I heard it was 8 million now. I don't believe those numbers, if I'm being honest. I think it's much less. And the reason I believe that is because we went to multiple cities and never found anybody trafficking kids. We went to Mexico City multiple times, went to several places around Latin and South America, and couldn't find trafficking. We just left. We would go down for 3 days, and we were really good at it. The reason why we were good undercover is because we were able to speak, and we're very good at just making friends with people. And that's what it was all about. You'd usually meet somebody, a street hustler who would meet, they would know somebody who knew somebody that was trafficking kids. And half the time we tried, we couldn't find anybody. And I thought that was awesome. And so I don't think the problem is prevalent, as they say. I will say that. It's my own personal opinion. They can use whatever stats they want, but that's my personal opinion. The other thing I had a problem with, though, the reason why I stopped doing it is because there were times when I felt like, so one of the ops that we did, I'll be honest, it was the one in Cancun. It was the one that Tim led. These these kids, they were like 22, 23. I don't think they had been trafficking. If they had, not much. And I remember, they went out and they found these guys, and it took them about 3 days in Cancun to find anybody trafficking somebody. And they finally found these kids. And part of me was like, well, were these guys really trafficking? Because they were young kids. They were kind of idiots. They were like 20, again, they're like in their young 20s. And I remember when they showed up to the party and they had these girls, and I remember thinking to myself, like, did these guys just go round up some girls they know or like whatever and said, come to this party, sleep with these Americans, these rich Americans will pay you or something. And it just never sat right with me. And I saw that firsthand. And so when people say maybe they create trafficking, I'm not saying that didn't happen. I do think it was a flawed method. Now, looking back with perspective, at the time, I didn't know anything. I was just the guy going on the ops, and that was the way they were doing it. But as I look back now, it's very conflicting, because on one hand, I absolutely think that there was probably a few guys that went out to find girls to bring back because they were trying to get tips from Paul or from Tim or whoever, and they were trying to prove that they were traffickers. I had to tell one kid in Ecuador. I remember he was like, yeah, we traffic girls or whatever. And I remember looking at the kid, I'm like, this kid doesn't traffic girls. He was like 21 years old. He's like, yeah. And I remember he's like, I'll be back in 2 hours. I'll show you. And he brings this girl back. She was like 16 probably. And he's like, yeah. What do you guys think? And I remember I pull him aside. We're in like the basement of this like warehouse thing. And I'm like, dude, this isn't, who is this? Is this your sister? Is this your girlfriend or what? And he's kind of like, what? And I was like, is this your girlfriend? He's like, yeah. I was like, you don't traffic this girl, do you? And he's like, yeah. I said, dude, get her out of here. You don't know what the fuck you're doing. Get her out of here. You don't traffic this girl. And he's like, okay. And that was my last stop I ever did. I was done after that. I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I was terrible undercover, if I'm being honest. I was good because I spoke Spanish. I could translate. And the truth is, the reason why Paul is the one that got in trouble is because Paul was so good undercover. We didn't have guns. We didn't have backup. The only thing we had was the fact that they never knew why we were actually there. If they had any inkling that we were not undercover, we would have been dead multiple times. And that op in Cabo was the most dangerous one we ever did. By far, these were the most evil dudes we ever took down. That's why I hate that it's out there that it was Cabo where this happened, because it does put some danger on those that were there. That being said, it is what it is. We were dealing with some people in Dominican Republic that got killed while we were doing the undercover work. We went the first weekend, and while we found this guy, he was a bad dude, and he got killed before we even got back there. I mean, this dude was in some bad stuff. And so there's two things can be true at once. And this is the part that I want people to understand is, number one is those ops absolutely needed to stop. I've had, I don't want to call it guilt, but I've had this thing hanging over it where it's like part of that was kind of bullshit. But then there's also the other part where I absolutely know we rescued girls, and I know that we saved their lives. And so both things can be true. And I've always been conflicted over that. I've only shared it again with the girl that I was dating a couple of years ago. It's just been one of those things that, how do you talk about that? Because I didn't want the work to stop. I wanted OUR to keep rescuing the ones that needed rescuing, but I also saw the problems with the way they were doing it. And I'm just trying to be very honest here. So those things can both be true. Another thing where two things can be true at once is I think Tim had good intent to start this. I think any guy that was in the business that he was in that had to look at that stuff that he did, I don't know how you come back from that. I would never in a million years let somebody I love be in that business or whatever. Very grateful that the entire time I was undercover, we never once had to see any pictures of any girls. We never had to see any girls. None of that was a part of it. We only would see the girls when they would bring them to get verification, and then at the party when they showed up where they got rescued. And so I wish I knew the outcome of some of the girls that we rescued. Of all the rescues we ever did, I never got a single update. I tried multiple times to get an update of what happened to them later. And so people have criticized OUR for their aftercare and all these things. I have no idea. I wish OUR was more transparent with that, but I also see that they're like trafficking victims. So how do you talk about that, right? So I don't know what that is. I do have another entire problem with this entire thing. And this is what I want to say about like, there's this thing energetically with the universe that like when you start talking about something more, it's like you're going to notice it more. You're going to be more aware of it. And I think the very act of talking, I've changed my opinion on this. My original opinion was like, we have to make sure everybody knows about trafficking. This is like this evil that nobody's talking about, that nobody knows about. And so it was like, I wanted to help spread the word to everybody. And the more it gets talked about though, the more it becomes real to people. And I think that plants the seed for a lot of people that never would have thought about it to actually participate in it. And the numbers that I've heard that it's only going up, the number of children being trafficked in the last 10 years. So since OUR was founded, it's not doing any better. It's actually doing much worse. I have no verification of any of these stats, by the way, but I did hear this from a very reliable person. And so I think that there's this level of harm that gets done by almost normalizing it or talking about it all the time, and then, you got the QAnon people that just they think everybody's a pedophile, and that's a whole problem because then it just makes the whole thing look ridiculous, like it's not happening at all. And so I just think that the whole thing is, I kind of wish, I don't know, like part of me thinks that it needs, like the very act of Sound of Freedom becoming the #1 movie, it's great for awareness, but how many people now have the seed planted that, oh my gosh, you can actually go get this, where they never would have thought about it before. And so that part is tricky. And I think that is being it's just not being counted into the fact of everything that's going on. So as far as what happens next, like I said, with OUR, when I was working with them, me, Andy McCubbins, Sean Reyes, Sean Whalen, Paul Hutchinson, there was a bunch of us that would go together undercover. There was a bunch of other great men, Dave Lopez, all these other great guys. And one by one, they would keep getting eliminated out. And I'm like, why does everyone keep getting kicked out? And every time I was with Tim in a private conversation, I remember just thinking like, this dude, this job's bigger than him. Like he doesn't, I think that's what happened. I think he had a good heart about it, but I think the thing was just too big for him. And so I think it overwhelmed him. He didn't trust anybody. If you guys go back to the Vice article from 2 years ago, Vice called me. They wanted my opinion. They tried to make me look stupid. They said that realtors are the ones going undercover. They discounted the amount of intelligence I think that I have in social settings, my ability to make friends with people, my ability to just be able to control situations, get things done. But whatever. I was just a realtor. So for the record, I guess that's true. But the one thing they quoted me correctly on, I was grateful they did, is, they said, why'd you get kicked out of OUR? And I said, well, I wanted to say it in a way, like essentially what happened is Tim and Paul got in a big fight. It was over a couple things. It started, I'll just tell you guys how it started, is Tim and Paul were at it's a fundraiser that I threw. We were sponsoring multiple organizations. Children Need Families had just launched. I got to help a lot of those families that were adopting people get their sponsorships. It was beautiful. I got to go with my ex-bishop and go to the houses of these families when they found out they were getting donated $20,000 to be able to donate kids, or excuse me, to donate the money to adopt the kids. Had a chance to go with Tim and his wife, and actually Janet, the weird psychic lady, was part of that. And that's a whole nother conversation we'll get into. But she was actually really nice. I didn't know she was a psychic. Never knew that until Paul told me later. But we're at this event raising money. We raised $150,000 at the charity. Again, Sean Reyes was the guy auctioning everything off. It was really beautiful. And all of a sudden we were talking about the Nazarene Fund, and there'd been a really beautiful story and Andy and Paul had been a part of it. And they showed a picture, and the picture was this girl they'd rescued being reunited with her mom. I mean, we're all in tears, 200 of us at the event, all of us in tears. And the picture was Paul, Andy, and this little girl, I think. I just remember that Tim wasn't in it because this is what the fight was about. All of a sudden, in the middle of the speech, I'm on the stage, Tim and his wife sitting front row, like get up and walk out. And so I'm kind of like, what is going on? I could tell they're pissed. And Paul kind of goes around there, and I kind of had a chance to sneak off a minute later, and they're yelling at each other. Full on, Paul and Tim are like fighting in the back of this club at the Sky Club in Salt Lake. And I'm like, what? You guys, what is going on? And Tim was pissed. Tim's wife was like, how dare you show a picture that Tim's not in? And like, you're not giving us any credit. I'm just like, oh my gosh, like it's not about, who the hell cares who gets the credit? It was this big fight over it. It was really petty and ridiculous. And from that day forward, seemed like there was a schism between them and us. Also at that time, Tim had kicked out a few other people I was really close. There was a guy named Dutch that used to go undercover as a Navy SEAL guy. He was awesome. He somehow, for some reason, got removed. Dave Lopez got kicked out. Found out later that was for a business deal that Tim wanted to be a part of, that Dave had found, and Tim felt like he was owed half of the deal because he was the one that connected Dave Lopez with the president of Haiti to be able to do this project. Crazy stuff, but it was all over money and ego. And it was really sad. I remember me and Andy McCubbins talking about all this all the time. Like, it was like they were just forgetting that it was about the kids. And so Paul started a new charity called Children Need Family, or excuse me, Child Liberation Foundation. And I think Tim and Paul ended up doing a meeting. It was at Paul's house, and it's the whiteboard meeting. It's the famous whiteboard meeting. And anyways, and at that meeting, Tim announces that everything that you've seen on that's true is exactly what Tim said. He basically said, we're going to set up all these nonprofits. It's going to funnel. It's going to help Tim Ballard build up himself. And then he said, we're going to use me to lead people back to the church. And he had been working with M. Russell Ballard as a silent partner. He announced that by name in that meeting, and Paul was pissed. Paul had been excommunicated from the church. He's not a hater of the church, but he's definitely not a friend. And Paul was just like, this is not why we're doing this. This has nothing to do with the kids. What are you talking about? And that was the day that Paul and Tim departed ways. So Paul tells us this story. Meanwhile, all the people at OUR, I don't need to get to that part. We did an op in Puerto Vallarta, and long story short, OUR was supposed to fund the aftercare. We did the takedown. We worked with the federal police in Mexico. By the way, the federales in Mexico freaking loved working with us. People have questioned if we were even wanted there or needed there. They begged us to come do these ops there. They said that we get more done in 2 days than we can get done in 2 years. And 30 of them flew up here to give us honorary doctorate degrees from 11 universities in Mexico. They gave us diplomat status in Mexico because they loved working with us. A friend of mine, Brian Zulo, actually, his brother-in-law got arrested in Mexico. I think it was 2 years ago. Not arrested. It was fake arrested by these people that were shaking him down. I called our connection. I called Brian Trapnell, who was helping us, we'd worked with in Mexico City with the top officials of Mexico. And within 48 hours, they were able to get this American, out of there and rescued. It was pretty awesome. And so I'm forever grateful for the Mexican federales, the people we worked with there. They love us to this day. We have connections with them. Anybody that says otherwise doesn't know what they're talking about. They loved having us, and we were really good assets to help them do what they were doing. And so there's a reason that they wanted us there. We were good at it. They have the recordings of these girls begging not to be trafficked, like all those things. Absolutely. That Puerto Vallarta op, we ended up doing the rescue, and OUR left us hanging. And it was John Lyons, who was, I think, fired from OUR he was horrible, by the way. That guy absolutely had the biggest ego I've ever seen in my life, but we don't need to go into that. He hated all of us, pushed us all out. When I quoted Vice and I talked about, my exact quote was, I've never seen somebody, I said, I have a lot of respect for Tim, but I've never seen somebody that's worse at keeping the wrong people around and letting the right people go. Because it was true. Dave Lopez, Dutch, all these people, Jen Dyer, all these people that really cared about OUR kept getting pushed out. And all the people that were snakes in the grass or were about their egos were the ones that he kept around. And so I quoted that article in Vice, and Tim called me and he was hurt by that. And we all got together. And, part of what we mentioned was, like I said, Tim, you guys left us hanging in Puerto Vallarta. Like he goes, that was John Lyons. They were trying to, basically, I think it was one of Tim's in-laws or relatives or something. It was like a coup. They were trying to get rid of Tim. He can tell you about it. I don't know. And they ended up pushing out all the other people. And he goes, you're right. I had the wrong people around me. I let the right people go. And he admitted to it. He said, how do we make this right? And we all got together at Paul's house, all of us that had basically been pushed out, and Tim, and Paul's wife, Otto, was there. And Tim essentially was speaking out of both ends of his mouth. But the problem was he never owned up to kind of what Paul had heard in that whiteboard meeting, and that was what still was bothering Paul. So we left there, and we all thought that we were going to maybe, just be friendly again. And I had heard from multiple people, I would speak at an event, and people were like, oh, hey, man, just, like Tim said some bad stuff about you to me. And I never once said anything bad about Tim. Even a couple months ago when Sound of Freedom came out, I made a post. I said, for the record, I never saw Tim do anything illegal or that would be against his integrity. And it's true. He was a horrible decision maker. I thought the job was too big for him. And that's why I was so hurt by these, what I heard came out about these women and that part of it, because I did see that part of Tim that was good. And I think that he wanted this to be something good. I think that, again, he pushed out all the people that would push back on him. I think all the people that held him in check were pushed away, and he kept all these yes men around him. I know one of the people he kept around him very closely, and he's a snake. I won't go into that, but long story short, I think these last couple of years, he just had the wrong people around him. He didn't have the people that cared, and because they started making really poor decisions, it sounds like. And so these women are going to come forward. Unfortunately, it's going to happen. If anybody that's supporting Tim is going to look stupid, I promise you, I already know from all the inside sources, you'll hear it next. The church already disavowed him. Tony Robbins' team is going to be next. Glenn Beck will be next. And the thing that sucks is we all wanted to support OUR. We all wanted to support this organization. We all wanted to support fighting against child trafficking. And both things can be true. We still can. And here's the worst part of the whole thing. OUR finally, over these last 3 months that Tim's gone, they have their shit together. It looks like I talked to some of the operatives that were like totally against OUR, some of the people that were like, that knew the insides of it all. And they said, dude, OUR is actually doing really good work now. And they said the worst part about all this is OUR is going to get taken down or it's going to really hurt it. And they're finally doing a lot of good. They're finally not doing ops the way that we used to do it. They also figured out that was not the right way to do it. And so OUR has been doing a lot of good the last 3 months, and it's probably an organization we're supporting now, but unfortunately it's going to be taken down when all this comes out. And I mean, Tim has just been leaning in so hard to, this victim, and it's this narcissism that he has, and God bless him, man. But I think once that all comes to light, I hope people will be able to see what it is. Again, this last interview where he was just adamantly talking about the evils coming at him, and it's just like, dude, enough's enough. It's time to tell the truth. For the record, I was with Paul on every op that I went on. Never once saw him do anything that was inappropriate. When he grew up that girl, again, at the time, had she been 16, it would have been a really bad thing. And I'm not going to make a judgment whether he should or shouldn't have done it. I'm glad he did it, because in the moment, the people we were working with absolutely were capable of taking our lives if he hadn't. That's all I'll say on it. As far as the psychic lady goes, that was also had come to light about the same time Paul and Tim started fighting, and it was just kind of like, geez. That being said, I mean, I don't know. I believe in energies and things like that. We believe in prayer. I mean, if she was a man and we called her a patriarch, would it be looked at differently? Probably. So I don't know. I don't know. It's obviously really weird. I didn't know about the Nephi thing till this week, though. That's really weird. But I do think that you can channel people. I don't know, whatever. I've never done it, but I think people have. So I hope I just want to get some information out there. I'm super grateful for my time at OUR. I'm super grateful for my time with the Child Liberation Foundation. I'm super grateful for the opportunities that Tim gave me. It was the gift of a lifetime to go on those. There's a part of it that, again, I'm happy to get this off my chest now, that I always sat wrong with me. And it is kind of like, well, shit, if we arrested a couple guys that maybe weren't trafficking otherwise, and those girls maybe weren't being trafficked, but we did rescue a lot of people that were, was it worth it? And I believe it was. That being said, I personally made a moral decision to quit doing it a couple of years ago. And it was hard to know what that was. And so I'm glad that OUR is doing things the right way. I really don't think the problem's as big as people say. I think that there is a huge issue, but I think that you can get people really emotional when you say there's 8 million kids being trafficked. I do not know where 8 million kids are being trafficked. We couldn't find any in half the cities we went to. And that's something I've never really talked about either. And so I don't know. I don't want to minimize the problem. It's huge. I think that because of the internet, because of the ability, I think the most important thing there is, how do you protect your kids? I think you have to understand that number one is most kids are trafficked from their houses. And I think if you understand what's really going on, you can approach it much differently. If your kid starts acting differently, if your kid starts being shy or starts acting out, something has probably happened, whether they've been abused or whether they're being trafficked. You want to be able to monitor who's talking to your children. You want to be able to see who's actually communicating with them. Most people, there's this thing, Andrew Tate, a lot of people have been saying that, that he's being railroaded and he's being, this whole thing is a setup as well. The one thing that I think he's going to be in big trouble for is the boyfriend approach of trafficking. He's on the record saying that he would pretend to date these girls or date them just long enough to get them to work for him to be webcam models. And that is a form of trafficking. Like, that is why he was arrested. And call it what you want. These guys will groom kids or women or girls or whatever. They'll get them to fall in love with them, get them to obey them. It's how pimps work too. It's the same thing. And then they kind of control them. And so the women technically are still free to do what they want, but when they break them emotionally and in a lot of other ways, mentally, it really robs them of their ability to defend themselves. And so it's tricky, man. I've interviewed Tim on my podcast, on this very podcast. I've interviewed Sean Reyes on this very podcast. Paul has been on this podcast. Coco Berthman, I did a podcast with her before I found out she was a fraud. That was a crazy story. If you want to hear more about that, there's an entire series on the podcast now. There's a podcast about it called the Coco Berthman story. It's tricky. I've had Dave Lopez on this podcast. You can go back and listen to any of these interviews. But these people, I think everybody wanted to help. I think a lot of people donated to OUR because they wanted to help. I think a lot of people shared about the Sound of Freedom because they wanted to help. That one's kind of crazy, by the way. Like, all these people going and buying extra tickets for the Sound of Freedom, all this, like, that was the greatest marketing ploy of all time. And I supported it because Paul's one of the executive producers on it, and he's a friend of mine. But none of that money was going to OUR. It was owned by these independent companies. And so, like, when you were doing that, all that money, it's not going to I think a lot of people were confused by that. But I did love the movie. I thought it was very well done. I hated the part with the jungle because I knew it was fake. Nobody ever did that. There was other parts of it that I felt like were very sensationalized, and it sounds like several other parts were made up as well. But as far as the movie goes, freaking amazing movie. The caliber of just the way that it was done, the music, the lighting, everything. I got a chance to go on set in Colombia for a day and watch them film down there, and got to meet Jim Caviezel. I've met weirder people, not very many, but I am grateful for a couple of the movies the guy's done. I think he's an amazing actor. But this is my entire unfiltered feelings about all this. I don't really have any other comment about it. I've, again, had so many people reach out. One thing that I will do is anytime I make a comment about something, I put my name on it. That's why I was the only one quoted in Vice a couple years ago by name. That caused me a lot of flack with all the people at OUR. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to say anything unless I'm going to put my name on it. So hopefully this helps give some clarity. It is coming down. Those names are going to be released of the women that Tim full on had affairs with, broke up families with. And so I felt like that was worth sharing. And from a source that knows, just trust me, that's what's going on. And so anybody still defending him, I promise you there's better things worth defending. There's better people worth defending in this situation. But you can still support OUR. You can still support the cause. There are other child trafficking charities out there. Dave Lopez has one. You can contact him directly. Tim Tebow has one. Those are two that I know that seem to be doing a lot of good work. And I believe the Maloof brothers have one that I know they do charities here in Utah and golf tournaments and things like that. And so if you're wanting to support the cause, there are multiple ways of doing that. Anyways, hope this is helpful. Much love, and God bless.